Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TEDxYouth Harpenden. My name is Alastair Holmes, and I'm the lead organiser of this event. Firstly, I want to say a massive thank you for attending today. All our speakers have worked really hard to create an interesting talk for you, and it's a real vindication of all their efforts to see so many of you here. We've had more than 250 people sign up from 20 schools across Hertfordshire and further afield, including Cornwall, Oxford and Ipswich. So to give you a bit of an idea of what TEDx is all about, every year, thousands of TEDx are run from all over the world and have a different focus. The theme of this event is Our Future. Our speakers have been specially selected for their unique viewpoints on some of the most critical issues facing young people today. There are three topics which we're going to cover: sustainability, environmental protection, and the future world of work. Each topic has one sixth former and one adult discussing it to try and give two fresh, different perspectives on pertinent issues like these. So, how will our event work? Today, you will hear from all six speakers, with our three adult speakers kindly agreeing to do a question and answer session. So I want to say another thank you for all of you who have sent questions in advance. I've tried to compile as many as time has allowed, but if your question isn't asked by me, then feel free to type a question in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, which our speakers are going to be monitoring and typing answers into there. Hopefully these topics will be thought-provoking, so if you do have a question for them that you didn't ask in advance, again, feel free to type it in that section, and our speakers will endeavour to answer as many as they can. So one such fascinating subject is sustainability, a topic which has grown in importance in recent years, being thrust to the forefront of the business and political agenda. Here to tell you more is ASOS CEO Nick Beighton, a role he has filled since 2015. He joined ASOS as CFO in 2009. Since then, ASOS has grown successfully into one of the leading fashion retailers, trading in almost every country in the world. Nick is passionate about sustainability, championing a shift in the fashion industry to address key ethical trade and working to overcome the hurdles that improving sustainability poses to 21st century businesses. So, Nick, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Alastair, for that lovely introduction. I'm going to talk to you about a company that recognises its place in the world, in the role of its consumers and its role on the planet. First of all, ASOS was founded in 2000, in the year 2000, so it's just over 21 years old. It was originally called As Seen on Screen. When ASOS is on its best day, we consider ourselves a purpose-driven organisation, mission-led, guided by values. The purpose of ASOS, and always from the start, was to give the customers the confidence to be whoever they want to be, expressed through their fashion, through their experiences, through the feeling fashion gives them. That purpose is also how we engage with our people. So my job as a leader is to give our people within ASOS the confidence to be whoever they want to be their best selves. Our mission is a lofty mission to be the world's #1 destination for fashion-loving 20-somethings. Our values that guide our journey are 4. They are authenticity, bravery, creativity, and discipline. Authenticity is, we think it's okay to be whoever you are. We choose all our people to work at ASOS for three simple things: their passion, their talent, their enthusiasm. And we ask them just to bring their best selves to work. Bravery. Bravery is what we do. One of our favorite phrases is turn left when others turn right. It just might be interesting. Creativity is the heart of everything we do. Whatever task, whatever role, whatever thing you perform for the organization, let's be creative. Let's not be ordinary. And discipline. Discipline isn't just about going through figures every morning, going wall to wall through accounts. Discipline is how you hone your craft. We think about it as the rock band that has the first ever album on pure passion, pure talent, but they get 10 platinum albums by honing their craft in a disciplined approach. There's a couple of things we feel very strongly about, very passionate about. The industry we operate in is often characterized as fast fashion, as if fast fashion is something bad for the planet and bad for people. And in many instances it is. ASOS doesn't do fast fashion, it does fashion really fast. One of the founding principles we believe in, and we believe in fervently, it was right from the very start. We call it fashion with integrity. And it has 4 pillars. And it's about recognizing our role in society and recognizing our role in the industry and recognizing our role and the impact on the planet and doing something about it. We recognize it's not good enough just to be less bad than the others. You have to make leaps forward to drive change. We live with the question is, can industry be sustainable? Well, we believe it can be, but it has to start with someone trying to do something about it. So the 4 pillars are, first of all, our people. The words we use here are wherever our garments are made, whoever handles our garments, whoever completes the technology, writes our marketing, does our work, they're entitled to have the right working conditions, the right salary, freedom of association, which basically means we encourage them to join unions and forums to create greater sustainability and protection for them. Wherever they are on the planet, simple, non-negotiable beliefs. 2, our products. 5 years ago, we decided to make our products more sustainable. One of the biggest components of clothing is cotton. And I'm delighted today that 85% of all the cotton that goes into ASOS is from sustainably sourced areas, which means people are looked after, no pesticides, organic treatments, doesn't come from regions in the world where they encourage modern slavery. You may have seen recent commentary about the Uyghur region in northwest China. We make sure none of that happens. And just a simple fact why else it's important. The average pair of jeans takes 1,200 litres of water. Water will become one of the most sought after commodities on the planet, which is interesting considering we are a planet where most of it is water. We've already seen that in South Africa a few years ago. The ASOS jean, done properly with technology, which we now do, consumes 80 litres of water because we deploy ozone washing. So we've already made a step change and we'll continue to take it down to even less. We passionately believe all products can be done that way. We're working on circular fashion, which is effectively reducing, recycling and reusing. And so rather than filling landfill with used garments, you put it back into the supply chain and you reuse it again. 70% of ASOS jeans now have around 30% reused cotton. So we pull the fibers apart, respin it and go again. And we're working on all our other products to do the same. So that's our product stream. The next stream is plastic. Our gift will not be to fill the oceans with single-use plastic. Our gift to people behind us will not be to not address something. We are haunted by the question, what did you do when you had a moment of responsibility to stop something like this? I'm delighted that ASOS plastic bags are 70%, 65% recycled and recyclable, and we'll get it 100% shortly. We will look and invest in new fibres so we can take out plastic. And the last one is planet. So planet is, what's our route to net zero? And our route, in the last 5 years, we've reduced our carbon by 30%, our carbon use per order. We're looking to get net zero in the next 10 years. And that's our next goal. So effectively offsetting or reducing the carbon impact that the business of ASOS are doing on the planet. That's our principles, fashion with integrity. We'll take care of that so customers don't have to worry about it. And we encourage consumers to choose brands and companies that take their role on the planet with responsibility. The final point that's non-negotiable for us is a diversity inclusion program. We simply wrap this up in, we believe our teams should be as diverse as our customers. ASOS ships to 200 countries, which is therefore the entire planet. And so we have to be as diverse as our consumer base, which basically means we have to work hard on our inclusivity so we can pull the diversity through. I recognize I've got a challenge whereby the majority of the ASOS board are all white Anglo-Saxon. That cannot be the next generation of leadership for ASOS. There is only 35% of my top team are female leaders, whereas 65% of my workforce are female leaders. One of my missions before I hand over is to reset that. So we have a management pool and a representation that's like the workforce, like our customers. Right, that's all I wanted to say, Al. Those are my opening marks. I hope there's something to pick on there, and I'm happy to take any questions now or later.
Fantastic. So thank you very much for your talk. So we've got a couple of questions for you. The first ones that have been sent in, but I'm sure you will have seen at the bottom of your screen, there have been a couple of ones that people have sent in as your talk continues. So you can type your answers to them at the moment. You can address them after a couple of these if you want as well. So firstly, we had some questions sent in on the future kind of the future of the clothing industry, and on the future kind of more generally on the high street as well. So this is kind of relation to the pandemic. So do you believe that the pandemic has been the final nail in the coffin for high street retail, and the online businesses like yourselves are the big winners?
No, I don't believe, there's two parts to that question now. I do not believe the pandemic we've all been enduring as as a society has been anything like the final death nail for the high street. The acceleration of digital and e-commerce has been a trend for 20 years. And I'll give you, but it's just been accelerated by the pandemic. And so a number of players that were weak going into the pandemic have sadly fallen away from the high street. And some of you may be aware, ASOS bought Topshop, Topman a few weeks ago. So we benefited from some of that. But no, I think the future of the high street for clothing will be around 50-50. And I can point to many really successful brands, Inditex brands, Zara, Pull & Bear, Next, many of those that are very healthy and have a good mix of shops, e-commerce, and have invested in their customer and their proposition extremely wisely. The second part of that is, what was the second part, Al?
Second part. So yes, it's kind of, do you believe that the online businesses like yourselves will be the big winners kind of coming out of the pandemic?
Right, so there's been many businesses that have won during the pandemic. Supermarkets have won because they've been allowed to trade and open throughout, and because they're an essential business for all of us. So they've had an amazing pandemic, albeit difficult working conditions for the people in the business and staff. Online businesses have certainly prospered, Amazon would certainly have prospered. Online platforms like Google, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok have continued to gain more eyeballs because we've been stuck in our homes, not been able to go to school, do the things that we do other things as well. So they've prospered. ASOS has done well, and we've been lucky that we've been able to trade, but we've not done as well as you might think. 30% of our products are for people who want to go out, want to go on holiday, and so we've not been able to sell any dresses, any leather shoes, any high heels, any swimwear. So that's been a headwind as well as a tailwind. The things that have done really well for us, however, has been sportswear, beauty and makeup, activewear, jog pants, sweatshirts, and men's underwear. So it looks like the nation has taken the opportunity to get new boxer shorts as well during the pandemic.
Brilliant. So we also had a number of questions on kind of, you alluded to it a little bit in your talk as well, but on kind of fast fashion and its relationship with sustainability. So for you, in the fashion industry, how are you dealing with the rise of fast fashion, especially when you see that there's kind of more kind of habits among consumers to go to companies like, or kind of sites like Depop and sites like that, where they can kind of get kind of more environmentally friendly secondhand clothing. So how do you kind of deal with that and compare yourselves to them?
Yeah, so Depop are an amazing customer proposition, but because it's a marketplace for secondhand clothes, and they trade under sustainable credentials. But I mean, the real success with Depop is actually you can monetize your old clothes and get money for it and go again. That's the real success. And so there is some, but the garments had to be produced in the first place, and the garments therefore have natural resources within them. But I also think that's a key step in the chain to reduce and recycle and reuse. But I'd actually like to go back to the first principles and go, how do you reduce the carbon impact in the first place of making those garments? How do you improve the sustainability of the materials? How do you improve the working conditions of people in it? So by the time it gets to reuse, we've already got a circular economy, or as close to it as we possibly can. The way it's not sustainable in its current form. So we have to make breakthroughs in all of those areas to think differently, invest in new technologies, and actually invest in old technologies to make that supply chain more sustainable.
So another thing that you kind of, again, alluded to in your talk is conditions in factories for a lot of kind of fashion companies. So there is a question from Lisa Murray, who has typed it into the Q&A section. You can have a look at that. I'd quite like to ask. So she says, what is ASOS doing to ensure that they do not have factories in their supply chain where sexual violence against females is the norm, as highlighted in the recent issue with H&M suppliers?
Wow, good question. Thank you for being brave. So we take a zero tolerance to anything like that. So it's a very clear policy. Now, the policies, it's good to have a policy in the first instance, but enforcing and policing and doing something about it is really important too. So we encourage, you heard me say freedom of association. We're the only e-commerce fashion player, or the first, sorry, to sign an association with a global union called Industrial. And the global union encourages every worker around the planet to sign up and be a member of that. Within that, there's a whistleblowing line where if anything that's untoward, something inappropriate, anything like that happens, you go to that whistleblowing line. It's managed by the union, comes straight back to me. 2 years ago, we trialed an app for all workers in an ASOS factory, where if anything happens of a behavioral nature like that, you press that app, it comes straight through to an ASOS hotline, and we investigate. Of course we do audits, of course we do regular checks, but we can't be there all the time to check it. So that's why we think these policies and these procedures around using tech, encouraging freedom of association, tries to create a safety net, so things that are abhorrent like that just can't happen on our watch. And if things do happen that we're not happy with, we make sure we step in quickly and we remediate. And I'll give you an example, a real life example. 2017, we found some Syrian refugees working in an unauthorized subcontractor in Turkey. And they range from 14 to 17, and there were 4. And they were all in, 3 of them in the same family. We went and found those children, and we put the children back into school at our cost. And the 17-year-old wants to become a doctor. She's now at university, and she's in 2nd year of medical school, funded by ASOS. Now, we can't do that for everyone, but we did it as a beacon to show how proper remediation should be done. And that young lady is called Fatma, and my team on the ground, or our team on the ground, check in with her every 6 months to see how her and her brothers and sisters are getting on. So it can be done. It can be done with values, and if it can be done and you make an example of this, others will follow.
Fantastic. So thank you for your candor in answering all of those questions. We have more that have been sent in via the kind of Google form and sign up, which I'll be typing into the Q&A section. And again, you will see that there have been quite a few that have been asked during your talk and during this section as well. So if you could type your answers onto those, that would be fantastic. So thank you very much for your time.
And good luck everyone else.
Thank you. So our second speaker today is Eliza Slater, a year 13 student at St George's School, where she is deputy head girl. She's currently studying English literature, geography and politics, and will also be giving a talk on sustainability. Eliza is focused on how young people can make a difference to herald in a new era of sustainable business. Her talk is entitled, "What if the world slowed down?"
What if the world slowed down? What do I mean by this? If the world slowed down on its axis, I'm no scientist, but I think we'd be in real trouble. But what I'm really talking about is, what if one day consumerism wasn't instantaneous? What if fast fashion was a thing of the past, a distant but not so fond memory? What would happen to our attitudes towards our planet? Now, I'm the youngest of 3 girls and a brother, but his fashion taste isn't really to my liking. No, not liking, taste. And when we were younger, we were always fighting over whose top was whose and the rules of, it was in my wardrobe so I can wear it. And if I'm totally honest, we still do to this day. The biggest perk, I would have said, of being the youngest was getting big bags of hand-me-down clothes. It was like Christmas Day had come early. But as I grew a bit older, I no longer wanted what my sisters had had, but my own clothes, and I wanted, like any young kid, what was new, whether that be school shoes with dolls in or trainers that lit up. So when did that shift happen between being excited to get new but used clothes to one you dreaded because you knew you weren't getting brand new ones? And when did that start mattering over everything else? I want to talk to you a little bit about why I'm so fascinated in not just how we can make fashion more sustainable and ethical, but why we as a society always feel that we need the newest thing and our collective desire to remain on trend. Now, I'm looking at a very small part in the puzzle, because fashion and its relationship to consumption cannot be fixed without addressing a larger problem: our desire to be accommodated to at all costs, at all times. But I'm not here to criticize wanting nice things, because we all like nice things. When I was preparing this talk, actually, one of the first things to cross my mind, and fine, call me vain, was what I was going to wear and if I needed a new outfit. And it was at this point I realized just how embedded wanting and needing new clothes, or this idea that to look good we need the newest things, was. But it's a bigger problem than that. Buying clothes shouldn't cost the earth. So what is the problem with buying clothes? And inherently there isn't one, but it's the false advertising and over-accessibility of unsustainable brands which causes the issues. Have you ever wondered where your clothes are made, or how far they've traveled to get to your wardrobe? Because the figures shocked me when I first researched them. But I've already found a problem with that. I had to spend a decent amount of time, and okay, maybe I'm not a tech pro with my Googling skills, but I had to spend a decent amount of time searching to find the carbon footprint of just one item of clothing in my wardrobe. So I researched how much my outfit really cost. And my outfit is a little different to what I initially thought I'd wear because I tend not to wear trackies at big events, but I assumed no one would mind. So my trackies are estimated at around 7 kilograms of carbon after tracking every stage of production. My top, a gift from my sister, although that does not give her any more right to steal it from me, produces 0.01 kilograms of carbon per wear, just from the dyeing alone. And I wear this a lot. But this doesn't mean you should throw out all of your clothes, because clearly that's not going to be good for anyone. So we've already found one problem. It's lack of transparency. Imagine walking into a Sainsbury's or a Waitrose, if you're that way inclined, and looking at the food and not seeing any nutritional labels. You would be a little worried, because who knows what they might have put in. The same should be said about the clothes we wear. If we have no idea just how much it takes to make a single garment, how is anyone to know what kind of impact they're having on the environment? And then understandably, we need to know how these clothes are made and under what conditions, so we can really understand the repercussions something as normal as buying clothes off an affordable online site truly has. So what is the problem with how clothes are made? When we buy polyester, we wear fossil fuels. It's as simple as that. And the only reason garments made almost entirely of polyester are deemed necessary, and the obvious choice for clothing companies, is the mass consumerism they're faced with. And just like that, we're back at where I started. It's a vicious cycle of needs meeting demands at an exponentially increasing rate. The global emissions from textile productions are equivalent to 1.2 billion tons of carbon, outweighing the international flights and shipping combined. Before I get a bit further into this, I just want to talk a little about this word sustainability. It's everywhere, but what does it even mean? I mean, there are so many different definitions, and its over and misuse has rendered it essentially meaningless. Brands advertised as sustainable, but then are cagey as to the sourcing of their materials or how garments are made. If we all truly understood the definition of sustainability, perhaps there'd be less confusion in attempting to make a difference. This is how the dictionary defines sustainability: the ability to be maintained at a certain rate or level, or avoidance of the depletion of natural resources in order to maintain an ecological balance. But I would argue my definition means a little more. Sustainability is to be able to meet our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet theirs. And right now it seems that sustainability is a long way off. But that's not the major issue. It's not great. But what is really damaging our environment is the basket to landfill mentality of single-wear items. Over $450 billion worth of garments are thrown away each year, and just a tiny fraction, less than 1%, are recycled. Fast fashion brands design clothes to be thrown away, so there's a continuous market. In the UK alone, £140 million worth of clothing goes to landfill every year. And this is perpetuated by unsustainable micro-seasons. So what is a micro-season? It's exactly what it sounds like. Most people would look at their clothes in 2 seasons, summer and winter. At a stretch, I could probably look for a spring and autumn selection too. But fashion brands have started making 52 micro-seasons per year. Their clothes are advertised to keep you wanting to buy the next micro-season and throw out the old. Trends these days seem to change so quickly that it's hard to keep up. This year we've said goodbye to skinny jeans and hello to everything flared. But whilst developing fashion should be a fun experience, there's a new layer of pressure on consumers, and this has been amplified by influencers. Clothing hauls and never wearing the same item of clothing twice is the new normal, and a lifestyle that is promoted to young people all over the internet. And how do we keep up? By buying cheap clothes at a very high price. It's not simply the unsustainable manufacturing of clothes, but somehow we as a society, a generation, have been made to think that there's an expectation to always be on trend. And this is largely due to the rise of social media influencers. And again, I need to establish that I'm not coming here to criticize a creator, because I am in no position to do that. I enjoy their content and would love to have that lifestyle, but it's not sustainable. And the message of cheap is better is embedded into young people's mentalities far too early, and it's something that needs to change. I'm going to list off some facts, and I wonder which would surprise you the most. 80 billion garments are produced each year, which is 400% more than 20 years ago. And on average, a piece of clothing is worn 7 times before being sent to landfill. In countries producing garments, often masses of toxic wastewater is dumped directly into rivers and streams. Not only this, but it takes up to 20,000 litres of water to produce just 1 kilogram of cotton. But this isn't all doom and gloom, because there are very real and cheap ways to make an impact. And I know what you're thinking, me not supporting fast fashion is not going to have any difference in the bigger picture, and you may be right. But if we as a society, a generation of conscientiousness, foster a new and sustainable approach to fashion through our attitudes and the adoption of slow fashion brands into mainstream popularity, we might just make a difference. There is already a small but growing community of sustainable influencers, and not just the Visco girls with their metal straws, but those who actively advocate and live by their principles of sustainability. And this is a trend that's going to rise in this time of climate crisis. But there are things to be done even without millions of followers. There are proactive steps you can take to make a difference. So what does this really look like in our daily lives? And obviously what our daily lives look like now is very different, but this doesn't limit your ability to help. This year charity shops were inundated with clothes from people with a little more time at home clearing out their wardrobes. Sites like Vinted and Depop are such an affordable way to treat yourself or a friend or a family member to show you care whilst also caring for our planet. But there's a bigger problem at hand, and it's something I keep mentioning. We've arrived at what I find makes this topic so interesting: the human need for newer now. Our world is built around making anything instant. Streaming services, next day delivery, pre-made meals, the here and now. But we're no longer appreciating that things take time and that things should take time. Slow and steady wins the race. The rate at which we are straining our planet, drying it up of its natural and bountiful resources, is going to lose us the race, our race. We've got to go slow, but unfortunately so will change. It's going to be a long, slow, and at times frustrating process. What I'm asking isn't for you to single-handedly change a fundamental principle in society that fast is always better. I'm simply asking for us to slow down just for a second and appreciate the details we may have missed before.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for your talk there, Eliza. I think there is a lot that everyone here watching can learn, and something they can take away to make a change in their individual lives to help with the topics you've been talking about. So our next topic for today is environmental protection, an extremely important issue for young people across the globe. Someone with a unique perspective on this issue is Craig Bennett, CEO of the Wildlife Trusts, one of the UK's most prominent environmental organisations. Craig has been CEO of the Wildlife Trusts since April 2020, with the ambition of putting a third of the UK's land and sea into nature recovery by 2030. He's been described as one of the country's top environmental campaigners by The Guardian as the very model of a modern eco-general, and has been listed as one of the UK's top social media CEOs. Craig was previously CEO of Friends of the Earth, where he worked to empower communities to take action to tackle the climate and ecological crisis. So over to you, Craig.
Thank you, Alastair. So we are facing a climate and ecological emergency. That's a phrase I'm sure you've heard many times over the last few years, not least thanks to the inspiring role that young people have played in pushing it up the global agenda. And as this is an event organised by TEDxYouth, I want to start by saying thank you. Your generation really gives me hope. And goodness, we need hope right now, because climate scientists have warned that decisions we make in the next decade or two could make the difference between whether we're able to stabilise climate change at maybe just about manageable levels, or whether we tip into runaway climate change, altering the trajectory of the Earth system for tens to hundreds of thousands of years, and potentially leading to conditions that would be inhospitable to current human societies and many other species. As if that wasn't enough, we've overrun the Earth. We've destroyed vast swathes of wildlife habitat, fragmented most of what's left, and decimated the abundance of wildlife populations. It's tragic, but it's also not very clever, because of course what we've plundered are our very own life support systems. We've reduced the ability of nature to provide us with food, fresh water, wood, fibre and fuel, to regulate the climate, floods and disease, and to purify water. It's a global problem and a local problem. According to the 2019 UK State of Nature report, since the early 1970s, in my lifetime, 41% of wildlife species in the UK have decreased in abundance. And the 2020 State of Nature report for Hertfordshire, published by the Hertfordshire Middlesex Wildlife Trust, suggests that roughly half of all species of conservation concern have declined in abundance in the last 50 years. Now, for too long, too many people have talked about the climate and ecological crisis as if they are separate issues. I've even had some people try and argue with me that one is more important than the other. It's complete nonsense, of course. The truth is that runaway climate change and ecosystem collapse are both symptoms of humanity's failure to respect and live fairly within environmental limits. The two are inextricably linked. We have no hope of slowing climate change unless we restore the abundance of nature, and we have no hope of slowing and reversing the crisis in biodiversity unless we tackle climate change, and more to the point, the root causes of both. Of course, to avoid climate change, we need to stop burning dead biodiversity, or what most people call fossil fuels, and we need to do that as soon as possible. But we also need to let nature help by sucking carbon out the air and storing it in trees, peatlands, grasslands, soils, wetlands, and billions and billions of insects, worms, birds, mammals, plankton, fish, and whales. Yes, each individual animal, big and small, is actually a carbon store. To do this and to address the ecological emergency, it's no longer enough just to talk about protecting or conserving nature. It's not good enough to slow the decline and the loss of nature. We need to reverse it. We need to put nature into recovery. And that means we need to make more space for nature. We need to restore the abundance of nature, and we need to get nature working again. Habitats need to be connected with each other. Wetlands need to be wet. Missing species need to be reintroduced. Nature needs to be given a chance to function. This has to happen over large areas and right around the world. And this is just starting to be recognised. In the last few months, world leaders from more than 50 countries have promised to protect 30% of our land and sea by 2030. And on June the 5th, 2021, this year, World Environment Day, the United Nations will launch its decade on ecosystem restoration. All this is welcome. But you know, this is a job that's just too big and just too important to leave it just to world leaders. And it's a job that's too big and too important to just leave to environmental campaigners and organisations like the wildlife trusts. Everyone needs to get involved in putting nature into recovery, and everywhere. Here in the UK, you might think, what can we do to help tackle these big global problems? We're only a small island off the west coast of Europe, and we've lost much of our biodiversity already. Well, yes, we are where the Industrial Revolution started, and we are, sadly, one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. But I think that's all the more reason why we need to be at the forefront of reversing these declines and putting nature into recovery. Wouldn't it be amazing if the UK was known as one of the first industrialized countries to bring wildlife back, and in a way that is part of addressing the global and ecological crisis? To do that, nature's recovery needs to come from the grassroots. We all need to think global and act local. We need everyone to get involved in finding and making more space for nature. And we need a common way of thinking and talking about it so that everyone knows why a particular bit of land is special, so that everyone knows what's your local or even hyper-local contribution to addressing this global problem, and why a particular bit of land has been left to go wild and messy, gloriously messy. So I want to introduce you to the concept of wild belt. Wild belt is anywhere, big or small, that represents new space for nature, new space set aside for nature's recovery. You see, the funny thing is, the nature conservation community has historically been pretty good at identifying some of the very best bits of nature we've got left and protecting them. What the nature conservation community has broadly been less good at doing, although we're trying to change it, is creating new space for nature, and to connect this to the best bits of what we've got left. At the Wildlife Trusts, a federation of 46 locally run nature charities across the UK, we actually have more nature reserves than McDonald's has got restaurants in the UK. 1,000 more. And we estimate that 60% of the British population live within 3 miles of one of our nature reserves. But we now need your help to join the dots. If our world leaders have pledged to find 30% of our land and sea for nature's recovery, what can you do to join them? Could you designate 30% of your garden as wild belt? With an estimated 24 million gardens in the UK, the way they are cared for can make a big difference to the natural world. Whether big or small, a window ledge or a yard, your garden can be a wildlife mosaic in a wider network of natural havens, linking urban green spaces with nature reserves and the countryside. Hedgehogs, bats, sparrows, song thrushes and stag beetles are all declining in the UK. But if we manage our gardens to benefit wildlife, these creatures and many more will find refuge. Leaving an area of grass to grow long, putting in even the smallest pond, and leaving piles of wood to decompose can transform a sterile garden into a wildlife oasis. What if every school designated 30% of its outdoor space as wild belt? Perhaps the bits at the edges of playing fields or the scrappy bits at the side of the car park. Or even if 30% isn't achievable, any amount is useful. And what if local communities work together to encourage local authorities to designate 30% of each local park as wild belt? Now, the psychology of how we communicate this is very important. If people think a section of their local park has been abandoned or neglected, they tend not to be very happy. But when simple signs are put up saying left for nature, people love it. Perhaps if we recognise these areas as wild belt, it would help even more. While we're at it, how about mowing our roadside verges a little bit less and allowing them to become wild belt wildflower meadows rather than tightly mown lawns? Over the last few years, some local authorities have started to do just this and have saved tens to hundreds of thousands of pounds. What's not to like? Roadside verges, railway embankments, riverside corridors, these could and should all be managed as part of a wider, wilder wild belt. When you stop to think about it, there are so many other scrappy bits of land in and around our towns and cities that are already very important for nature. Churchyards, derelict and brownfield land, footpaths, back alleys, railway sidings, and many other areas. This is what the nature writer Stephen Moss has called the accidental countryside. Nature would be in an even worse state without them, and perhaps it's time we recognise them for what they are, the hidden havens for Britain's wildlife. We need to change how we think about these places. They should no longer be the neglected bits of our towns. They are part of that wider, wilder wild belt, playing a crucial role in helping us address the climate and ecological emergency. And wouldn't it be great if we could have a proper wild belt, not just in, but around our towns and cities, providing land for recreation, purifying water, growing native woodlands through natural regeneration, and storing floodwaters. This could all connect up to a more strategic wild belt in the wider countryside, where, for various reasons, some of our low-grade agricultural land may well come out of production in the years ahead. Wild belt could give farmers and rural communities a new and viable future. If we could do this, then our existing nature reserves would no longer be the last remaining fragments of nature. They would become the foundations, the building blocks for nature's recovery. We need to protect them, but also connect them by using Wildbelt to create a nature recovery network and bring wildlife back. This is important for nature, but it's important for us humans too. There's now so much evidence about how critical our daily dose of nature is and our access to green spaces for our physical and mental health. Something that has become clearer than ever during this past year of lockdown. And if you're thinking, well, I'm sure that's all very important, Craig, but our economy must come first, I have to respectfully point out that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment, not the other way around. Creating Wildbelt will help tackle flooding, replenish our soils, restore our pollinators, and of course, capture carbon. It's been estimated that if we can be really ambitious and put 30% of our land and sea into nature recovery in the right way, that could suck carbon out of the air equivalent to a third of the UK's current carbon emissions. Of course, most of this will be through restoration of large areas of peatlands, of woodland and our marine environment. But equally, we can't do it unless everyone gets involved and that we create that wider, wilder Wildbelt and do it everywhere. Our wildlife is supposed to be wild. Let's create Wildbelt and let nature roam free. Let's restore the relationship between people and nature. Everyone can get involved, young, old, even middle-aged parents, individuals, families, schools, communities, businesses, small, medium, large, and global, local authorities, public authorities, and those with no authority. Together, we can make Wildbelt happen and put nature into recovery and all do our bit to rewild the earth. Together, we can do this. Together, we have to do this. So let's get on with it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for your talk there, Craig. I think there's a lot that everyone can learn and everyone can implement as well to help with the kind of overall goal of environmental protection in the UK. So we have a couple of questions that have been sent in advance, and you also have some that have been sent in the Q&A section underneath as well, which you can answer after this. So the first question is about current threats to the environment. So what is the least understood threat to wildlife and the environment at the moment?
I would say possibly plastics, actually. And you might think, well, surely there's been an awful lot of attention on that over the last few years. But, you know, actually, the real understanding of microplastics and the impact of them on both wildlife and our health, our human health, I think is poorly understood even by scientists, let alone at the moment, let alone by the wider population. But there's also big concerns over the use of chemicals that we use in the home and in agriculture and the impact they have on wildlife and so many other issues, and the impact of climate change on wildlife as well. That's very severe.
One of the big pressures on the environment in the UK is housing. So as demand for housing increases nationally and internationally, will it be harder to preserve large areas of wildlife?
That's an excellent question, because we do need new housing. And at the Wildlife Trust, we've done a lot of work actually with housing developers to try and work out how you can build new housing in a way that actually is good for nature. That's both making sure that nature is integrated in and around the housing development itself, but also that we create something called net gain for biodiversity. So this is that if a bit of land has to be lost for housing, and normally it's kind of agricultural land rather than really high biodiversity land, if we can make sure that that is protected. But if a bit of greenfield land is used to build new housing, then we need to make sure that actually that results in a net increase in biodiversity by creating new land for biodiversity, hopefully alongside or as close as possible to the new housing development. And that's a good example of the kind of land that then we need to kind of consider as Wildbelt, so that we can really protect it and make sure it's there in perpetuity rather than just for a few years.
I think it's quite easy when looking at topics like the environment to get bogged down in some of the more negative headlines and negative press. But there's been some focus on some of the positives that have come out of the environment this year. So What do you think were the positives for the environment in 2020?
Oh, I do think there's been a huge seminal shift in the way people think about a lot of issues over the last year because of the pandemic. And hopefully it will be one of the very few silver linings of this otherwise terrible time. You know, unquestionably, there has been a kind of shift in the zeitgeist about how people think about nature, and in particular local nature. You know, at the Wildlife Trust, we saw a 2,000% increase in visits to our webcams from our wildlife reserves during the first lockdown. And we've seen a huge increase in activity in other ways at our nature reserves and getting in touch, people wanting to take action for nature. And I think people have come to realise that actually that daily dose of nature is very important for their physical and mental well-being. And actually just hearing bird song again because of a reduction in traffic noise and so on, people have really appreciated that. The important point is, can we keep some of those benefits as we come out of lockdown? Can we keep the best of that as we kind of move forward? I think the other point about this is yes, we have seen quite a lot of gains for the environment over the last few years. The biggest challenge is also we're facing this ticking clock of these huge problems of the climate and ecological emergency. They are so urgent to address. If it wasn't for that, we could celebrate all the successes. The problem is that actually the challenge we face has got a time period on it as well. But I think with the more that people can get involved in this mission to address these issues, and as I said at the start, you know, young people have been at the forefront over that the last few years, the more we can tip the balance and actually start to address both the climate and ecological emergency and make some real progress.
So you alluded to it a little bit in your talk, but governments have been quite clear about setting targets for themselves and internationally as well. And I know the UK is hosting the climate change conference, I think COP26 later this year. Do you think now that coming out of lockdown, governments are finally going to take decisive action on climate change?
Governments are terribly good at setting targets. They're very good at setting targets. They're not so good at meeting them and delivering them. And that's really why I gave the focus of the talk that I did, because I've come to believe through my career and my work on this over 25 years or so on, that of course we need governments to set those targets. Of course we need governments to act and put the policies in place that are needed to address these. But actually, it's only when you see communities getting involved and actually, if you like, putting their shoulder to the wheel, that we see the real change. And it has a mutually reinforcing cycle. Actually, the more that governments see that communities are serious about this and taking action at the local level, the more governments scale up their ambition and feel that they've got people on their side. So government has just set, our government, the UK government has just set this target of getting 30% of our land and sea into nature's recovery by 2030. I think we can deliver on that, but only if we have both government acting, business acting, and local communities acting to deliver it and reinforcing each other, keeping each other in check to make sure we're doing that. And that will be crucially important. And the same will be true on climate targets as well. We have to see the action at local, national and international levels, and then they can reinforce each other.
The world has seen a great deal of technological innovation over the past couple of decades. And what are some of the technological inventions that you think can aid us in becoming greener?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, the one that's really impressed me over the last 20 years, say, has been the huge leap forwards in renewable energy. I mean, you know, it's actually improved in its effectiveness and efficiency and fallen in cost far faster than anyone dared to predict. And that's kind of been really significant. And actually, as we move into ever more digital world, actually just the ability to manage our energy in a more decentralized way makes a huge difference as well. But I mean, the point is technology is clearly going to play a huge role in helping solve the environmental crisis if we manage it carefully. Equally, it could become a big part of the problem if we don't. So it's not so much technology per se, I would say, it's almost our relationship with it, how we make sure technology works for us in solving these problems, rather than us almost working for technology, which can sometimes be how it is unless we're careful. So I think there's huge opportunities available to us, but we've actually got to funnel our amazing creativity and inventiveness into the right areas to solve some of these problems.
So one final question. If you were Prime Minister, if you were leader of this country, if you could pass one single law at a stroke, what do you think it would be?
Oh, excellent question. Well, I mean, I hate to say it, but there's no single thing that would make all the difference. But actually, what's often being talked about is how we can actually kind of make it much more of a recognize this much more of a sort of crime about harming nature, and actually how can we set aside, make sure there's a much better legal framework long term for protecting nature, and learning to live alongside it, and recognizing how it completely underpins our economy, and it's essential for doing that. So I would be really interested in exploring how we can make sure we've got a legal framework that enables us to have a good economy that is all part of a much more sustainable environment. As I said, the economy is a subsidiary of the environment, not the other way around. So we really need to make sure we've got a healthy environment if we ever want to have a good, healthy economy long term.
Fantastic. So thank you very much for answering those questions. There have been quite a few that have come in whilst you've been answering these questions and during your talk, which I'm afraid we don't quite have time to answer like this, but if you could type your answer to them, then that would be fantastic.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. So our next speaker is Emma Carney, a Year 12 student at Roundwood Park School, who is currently studying biology, economics, and psychology. She has experience in public speaking through her success in the Rotary Youth Speaks competition, where she reached the regional final. She will give a different but equally intriguing perspective on environmental protection, bringing in her studies of economics. Her talk is entitled, "Is it selfish for us to expect Brazil to save the Amazon rainforest?" Over to you, Emma.
Is it selfish for us to expect Brazil to save the Amazon rainforest? So, here I have a regular bottle filled with air. Don't get me wrong, it's great air. Really refreshing, full of oxygen. So, do I have any takers for £1? It's only £1, less than most bottles of water. Plus, you need this more than water, really. Without air, we'd all be dead in 3 minutes, but we have 3 days without oxygen. Without water, sorry. We all need fresh air. Why isn't anyone willing to pay me for it? Of course, this is exactly where our problem lies. No one wants to pay for air because you already have it for free. Air is a public good, everyone uses and consumes it for free, so why on earth would you volunteer to pay for something that you already have? I wonder if I might be able to persuade you otherwise. The Amazon, 55 million kilometres squared, roughly 227 times the size of the UK, absorbs 2 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide each year, 5% of our annual global emissions. Not only does it absorb that much, but it harbours an estimated 76 billion tonnes of carbon, and if removed, would release just as much, whilst also not absorbing the additional annual 5%. Now, in reality, for this to happen, it would not just be humans cutting all of this down. Just 40% would be enough to set off a chain reaction, destroying it forever. Some scientists predict that if even 20% of it was destroyed, then the ecosystem would be so irreparably disrupted that it would irreversibly turn into a dry savanna. According to Greenpeace, in the last 30 years, 15% of the Amazon has been destroyed, the equivalent to 34 UKs. Following the severest prediction of 20% and continuing for it to be destroyed at its current rate, that would give us roughly 10 years before we could face losing the Amazon forever, and with it, 25% of the world's biodiversity. Not only that, but if we lost the Amazon, it could create a huge ripple effect, only encouraging more extreme weathers such as flooding and dry spells, increasing the number of forest fires, which we've already seen a rise in. So, I hope at this point we are all in agreement that we need to save the Amazon. Well, so are some large companies. Many have actually threatened to boycott Brazil if action isn't taken. However, this appears to be water off a duck's back for Brazil's president, Bolsonaro. Since being elected, he has only encouraged deforestation. His open support for commercial activity on protected lands has seen a 12-year high in deforestation. In 2019, Bolsonaro was quoted saying, "You have to understand, the Amazon is Brazil's, not yours. If all this devastation you accused of doing was done in the past, The Amazon would have stopped existing. It would be a big desert. And in all fairness to him, he does have a point. Back in the 18th and 19th century, most of the now Western world went through the Industrial Revolution, starting in Britain and spreading throughout Europe, America, and Australia. During this, we, as the name suggests, started industrialising rapidly. Fossil fuel use grew immensely, countryside was destroyed and used to make room for the ever-increasing and polluting factories. It was predicted by Professor Knitz that after this point, America's average income per capita was 6 times the world's average. However, for Latin America, it was as little as 2/3, and Africa and Asia is estimated at less than 1/4. The countries we left behind in the 18th and 19th century are still behind. All are either classified as less economically developed countries, LEDCs, or newly industrialised countries, NICs, often characterised by poverty and a lack of access to education and healthcare. Now, in non-COVID times, I would show you a graph by Our World in Data on the screen. However, I cannot. But the graph would show you who has produced the carbon emissions in the atmosphere from the date 1751, pre-industrial revolution, to 2017. It would show you that the EU and USA alone make up 47% of it, close to half, and that Brazil is responsible for 0.9%. Yet, for some reason, Brazil appears to be responsible without any form of support from the rest of the world for the cleanup of 5%. It's like Brazil is the personal cleaner of the world. North America, Europe and Asia go about their regular polluting lifestyles, and Brazil has to clear it up. Let's compare it to making a cup of tea. America gets the mugs, but pulls from the bottom of the cupboard and smashes 3 more on the floor. Doesn't clear that up. They then go to get the tea bags and manage to tip the whole selection on the floor. Europe then takes over and goes to fill the kettle up. The water sprays everywhere. Finally, Asia takes over and gets the sugar and milk, leaving the cupboard and fridge open in the process. As they walk over, they trip on the broken mugs on the floor, and both the sugar and milk go everywhere. Brazil arrives and gets told to clear it up as America, Europe and Asia sip their tea peacefully, knowing that the mess will be cleared up. But, of course, with no payment and no tea in the future. Now, if we take a second to look at the statistics. For Brazil, a hectare of land is worth $400 forested. However, it's worth $1,400 or more cleared. Logically, it makes sense for Brazil to want to do what first world countries did in the past. However, there is a certain element of short-sightedness about this mindset. As if Brazil continued to destroy the rainforest at its current rate, then the Amazon would be gone forever, the land unusable to anyone and everyone. In that scenario, no one wins. Therefore, we must take action. However, I do not think boycotting is the way to go. Brazil requires help, not hindrance, to save the rainforest. It doesn't matter how important the rainforest is. Economically, they most likely won't make the proper changes until it provides the same benefits as removed. Therefore, we must work with Brazil. This may not be as easy as it sounds, however. In August 2019, G7 offered £16 million to Brazil in order to help fight the fires in the Amazon, which environmental campaigners called chump change. 16 million was predicted to pay for the putting out of the fires, but no more. Brazil, however, refused. Now, there is no real way for us to know what happened in that G7 meeting with Brazil. However, clearly something went wrong within. As before the meeting, Brazil had said they would be open to receiving the money, but after refused and insisted that Mr. Macron must withdraw the insults he'd made to my person. Firstly, he called me a liar, along with accusing him of questioning Brazilian sovereignty over the Amazon region and saying that to talk or accept anything from France, whether it be with the best possible intentions, he, Mr. Macron, will have to withdraw those words and then we can talk. In a later development, Bolsonaro responded to a joke on Facebook, mocking the age of Macron's wife and leaving a mocking comment, in which Macron condemned the remarks as extraordinarily rude and sad. Now, in all honesty, this seems like a seriously childish rhetoric between the leaders of two countries, and reminds me more of an argument that I might have had with the girls in my form in Year 8 than two world leaders. This is far too serious a matter for the personal and immature quarrels of leaders to be getting in the way of. So, how do we stop this lose-lose situation we seem to be heading towards? First of all, we need to stop this childish tit-for-tat behaviour. And that coming from a 17-year-old says something. All it does is create hostility and a lack of collaboration. And we need collaboration for the greater good of current and future generations around the world. Petulant behaviour has its time and place, but not by world leaders, and when we appear to have a ticking environmental time bomb on our hands. First of all, we need to help Brazil. If a Western nation came up with the technology that would get rid of 5% annual emissions, we would pay them a vast sum of money for it. So why don't we do the same for Brazil when it's such an essential part of the global ecosystem that's already there? We must put aside our differences and work together for the greater good. How can we condemn Brazil for something we did just a few hundred years ago? The same actions that have put us in this pious and prosperous position we are in. Now, an issue we have is that it's estimated that 90% of deforestation in the Amazon is illegal. So, in order to stop deforestation, Brazil must first of all increase their protection of the Amazon. But this isn't free. In order to do so, they must pay the people protecting it. But why would they do this when the land created for cattle ranching generated $6.7 billion for the country's economy in 2018? We must put ourselves in Brazil's shoes. Would we have stopped the Industrial Revolution if we knew the environmental impact? Most likely not. We as humans are short-sighted and selfish. And if we knew now that it would only really take effect in 200 or 300 years' time, we probably wouldn't have stopped. We would have seen our growing incomes and the improvement in our quality of life and disregarded the possible impact that would arise in the distant future. Therefore, we must economically incentivize Brazil to stop deforestation. How might we do this? Well, we all use the Amazon and its products, so why aren't we willing to pay for it? Like I said earlier, if the Western country had the technology to get rid of 5% of carbon emissions each year, we would pay them a vast sum of money for it. So why don't we pay just a small amount of that to Brazil? Under the Paris Climate Agreement, we could have countries agree to pay certain amount of taxes to countries with large rainforests and essential woodlands, possibly even based around usage. The largest emitters pay the largest amount of money, progressively taxing countries and giving them a now monetary incentive to reduce their emissions. This money could not only be used to protect the rainforest, but also help pay for education and benefits, which could help increase the skill level within countries and reducing the possible need for jobs related to deforestation in the future. In the Amazon, for example, 25% of all drugs used today are derived from rainforest plants, and it's often referred to as the world's largest medicine cabinet. This money could help raise the average education level, which could mean even more people within the country could be responsible for some amazing developments in medicine from their own medicine cabinet. In addition, some remaining money could help reduce the possible short-term economic impact of an increase in unemployment due to a loss in the job sector. However, the possibilities are endless. So, what can you do? Email your MP, let them know what the public cares about. Politicians make their manifestos based on what they think will get them elected. Therefore, we can influence them. Talk to other people, share, discuss. The more people that discuss and communicate, the bigger the force behind it. The possible positive impacts it could have are endless, really. We just have to be prepared to put our money where our mouths are. Now, who's willing to pay for a bottle of air?
Fantastic. Thank you very much for your talk, Emma. You've spoken on a huge issue that is incredibly important internationally, as well as for the future of the globe. So, as we enter our uncertain times, our final topic becomes especially important for young people to understand. This is the future world of work and the pathways into it. Our next speaker is local MP Bim Afolami, who is very keen to speak on this topic. Bim was first elected to the Harpenden and Hitchin constituency as a Conservative MP during the 2017 election, and was re-elected in 2019. In his time in Parliament, he has championed a number of local causes, such as protecting the Green Belt and helping local businesses. His interest in this topic was sparked by a desire to give back to his country and help others have the same opportunities as he has had. Bim's talk is entitled Technology and the Changes to the Economy, Society and the World of Work that will result in the coming years. Over to you.
Alastair, thank you, and thank you all for joining. And I first of all just want to say that I've been incredibly impressed with the student speakers. Really, really brilliant. And it's clearly been a brilliant event. And I want to also say a huge thanks to Alastair for organising. And I first came across Alastair at my sixth form debating competition or school debating competition a couple of years ago. And he was incredibly impressive then, and he's continued to be. So I just wanted to say those thanks. I want to try and talk to you guys about what you are going to be facing in the years to come. Not in 10 years or 20 years, in the next 5, 6, 7 years. As you get to the end of your school career, go to college or university, and then get into the world of work. And I am seeing at an incredible pace the changes that are going on, what technology is doing to the world of work, what it's doing to our economy, and what it's doing to our society. And I'm not convinced that they're really being fully elucidated and explained in the press. The first thing, and some of this will be sort of autobiographical, because it will make connections with how the world is now to compare to how it was when I was your age. And look, I've just turned 35. I know you probably think I'm really old, but I still feel young at least. So I worked, after I left university, I went to work as a lawyer in the City of London. When I was a lawyer, I worked at a big firm, and there were 120 new trainees that year, 120. And one of the big things you had to spend your time doing when you came to a new matter in the litigation department was you went to this thing called a data room. And the data room was literally a room full of data. It was full of big box files of A4, lots of boring documents. And the junior trainee or the junior associate's job was to go through and look for these documents and check various things. Now, all of that isn't just done online. It's not done even by human beings. Most of that work that people like me used to do only just over 10 years ago is now done by technology. And I want to make this point because when people talk about technological change affecting work, you'll often hear about jobs being automated. You think of factory jobs, and you look at pictures or videos of assembly lines and this sort of thing. And that has happened to those jobs. But in what we like to think of as white-collar jobs, the sort of jobs, dare I say it, in Harpenden that your parents, a lot of your parents will do, and indeed the jobs that you might hope to do and that they hope for you to be able to do, technology is hugely impacting not just the way those jobs operate, but also their existence at all. And the reason why this is important is because I picked law, but whatever you're going into, and the great thing about my job as a member of parliament is I just get to meet so many people. I get to see so many things, get to hear about, get involved with so many different aspects of our economy and society. And whenever I speak to any business owner, big, small, or in between, international or British, the impact technology is having on the actual operation of all of these jobs is significant. If you wanted 10 years ago your car to get fixed, if your car broke down, somebody would turn up in overalls and they'd get under your bonnet and they'd fix stuff. Now, somebody turns up with a laptop. So the first thing I want to say to you guys is that digital skills, technological skills are not just optional. They're not just good for entertainment. They are absolutely critical. And I'd urge all of you to do whatever you can to make sure your skills in those areas are as good as they can be, because it doesn't matter whether you're good with words, numbers, want to work outside, want to work inside, whatever it is you want to go and do, I promise you that having good technological skills is going to be really, really important. The second thing, and it leads me on from talking about the world of work, is broader changes to the economy. and changes to the economy in places like Harpenden and, you know, Hertfordshire and England. One of the big one of the big advantages, should I say, about living in a country like the UK is that there are a lot of opportunities. There's high quality education, there's a flourishing economy, there's innovation, it's a safe place to operate, there's a decent legal system, etc., which means that there are lots of opportunities for people to go and do things. You can set up a business, you can go and work for another one, etc. You have a reasonable expectation of that. But what I'm starting to see, especially after COVID, and this has all happened in the last year, is a lot of international firms who used to think that they had to be in London or they had to operate in the UK have now worked out that, bearing in mind that quite a lot of their workers seem to be quite productive working from home, and yes, they will work in the office a bit more once COVID's over, but they won't work in the office 5 days a week. They're starting to think that they can get that accountancy or that law or that project management or that sales or whatever it is, they can get that done actually in any country in the world that speaks English. And that person who might do that job in, I don't know, in India or in Australia or in Austria, previously they didn't even think of recruiting that person because we were in a mindset which was, if you're working for a firm in the UK, you sort of had to go into the office and that was how work was. Now the mindset has shifted so radically, partly because of COVID, but it was also happening before that, that now a lot of businesses, and I know this is happening already, a lot of businesses are getting more work from the best qualified person they can find. And the best qualified person they can find is not necessarily the person who is British, who's come out of the British system, who happens to live near London. And I say this because a huge amount of our prosperity as a country, indeed our economy's sort of heartbeat, is based around location. It's based around established patterns of working. And we just have to be mindful that going into the future, the next 5, 10, 15 years, and it will be as quick as that, I believe. To get that opportunity, you're going to have to be the best person to do the job, not just in the right place. And I think that that level of competition is something that I think it's a duty for politicians to think about and also to explain, and for us to start to work with our constituents, indeed the citizens of the country, to think, how do we make sure that the UK and the people here are best suited to adapt and change and have opportunities in that world, which I think presents opportunities as well as threats. The third thing I'll say is about societal changes because of technology. Now, I'm not going to sort of bang on about social media. I think you guys probably have a much better understanding of it than I do, and I think it's been quite well discussed and trailed, the positive and negative aspects of social media. But I've just been pondering over the last year or so. We had Black Lives Matter protests last year. I know it seems like a long time ago now. It was only a year ago. Black Lives Matter, Greta Thunberg and her leadership and the climate activism that several speakers have talked about, the huge importance of climate change. And most recently, and I can't believe I'm mentioning this, the Meghan and Prince Harry interview. Why am I talking about these things in the context of technology? I'm talking about them because these are all global things. These are things that, because of the spread of technology, in particular the smartphone, are having an impact all over the world. Black Lives Matter started because of a particular incident to a particular Black man in the United States. And it sparked worldwide protest, discussion, demonstration, etc. Greta Thunberg has had a similar impact, although obviously on a different subject. And as somebody who has friends in different parts of Europe, friends in the United States, my phone has been awash with messages from all over the world over Meghan and Harry. These global issues are hugely significant. And the reason why they're significant is that we don't have global governance. We don't have global ways of thinking about how social media companies should operate or the internet should operate. We don't have global rules on most things. Yes, there's the United Nations, but it's very, very, it's slow, and frankly, large parts of it appear to be not working very well. Our politics is actually increasingly local. It's increasingly local, but yet the things that people are deriving their political opinions from are increasingly global. And that dichotomy is something that I think is going to pose huge challenges in the future. I happen to think that it may, cause some societal unrest. And the last point on the societal, and it actually links in with the points I was talking about in terms of the impact of the world on work and the economy. There are big winners when things go global. Because if you are really good at something, if you set up a company that has a particular idea or a particular reach, or you're just a fantastic accountant or salesperson or whatever it is in the world of work, your potential earnings, your potential upside in economic terms or financial terms is much greater than in the past. And the people you'll be operating with are much more global than in the past because of the impact of technology and the internet in particular. Now, what this can do, and I must say, I have, now my life is obviously in British politics, but before I was in politics, I worked in the City of London and spent some time working in the US. I've worked in different parts of Europe. When people are in that sort of world, I think it's easy for them to sometimes become disconnected from their own communities and their own country. And that is something that presents a big societal problem, particularly if these people are earning more money than anybody ever used to for the same job, because effectively the revenue they're getting for whatever it is they're doing is not just their own country, it's global. And so I think that is also a societal impact that needs to be thought about and needs to be challenged. And so I suppose I'm telling you all this, and you might think to yourself, if you're still awake, what are we supposed to do? I don't know what's going to happen in the future, and neither does anyone else. And therefore, the core thing is that we should all try and be adaptable. And in particular, what I like to say is anti-fragile. It's the title of a book from a philosopher called Nassim Taleb, which is actually one of my favorite books. But the reason why I say anti-adaptable, okay, we understand what that means. You've got to be able to adapt to new situations, adapt to what's going on. Anti-fragile is a slightly different concept. We've got to embrace stressors when they come, when things change, when things stress whatever we think of as our stable situation, and not seek to hide away from that, embrace that and try and learn from it and try and improve. And if you have that sort of mindset, then I think you'll be set up for the future. I think that's the first thing. And the second thing we need to do, and this is the societal point, is we've really got to take an interest in our communities. I don't mean this in a political way. I mean, there'll be people who are interested in political issues. But we cannot, you cannot allow, whatever it is you end up doing, you cannot allow yourself to be too divorced from your country, from your community. Because I see this increasingly in politics, because the thing about politics is you operate, frankly, with the sort of, you end up seeing the extremes of everything. You often spend your time with the sort of most influential, the richest or most successful people, and you're often trying to help the least well off, the least successful. And you see a lot of extremes. And I'm seeing a lot of the time now, even people who are my age in their mid-30s, so much of the way they think about the world is global, and they lose contact with their own communities and their own country. And I think that is something that is a recipe for disaster. So overall, my message is there are a lot of changes coming down the track. They're going to affect the job you're going to do, the nature of the economy you're going to be trying to operate in, and how you think about the world and society and politics in its broader sense. Stay adaptable, be anti-fragile, and stay connected. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Bim. I really appreciate you kind of coming in and doing a talk. Like all our speakers, you received a huge amount of questions from the Google form. I'm keeping it now to ones directly related to kind of the topic you've been talking about, but we will put all of the questions, or most of them, into the Q&A section. You kind of type some answers after this. So firstly, it relates to education and the pandemic and the role technology has played in that. So do you think the increase in the amount of time spent doing online learning will hinder our generation and our ability to perform effectively in the world of work? And do you think this, our ability to perform effectively in the world of work?
The answer is it depends, and it depends on how the institutions that you are doing your education in, whether that be obviously in your case it's schools, but if you go further up, often universities as well, they need to not see the online as inherently inferior in terms of output and how people learn. Because, and by the way, you know, I am pretty old-fashioned guy, right? Like I like pen and paper. The speech I wrote today, you know, I wrote notes on paper. I'm not someone that thinks everything needs to be online. There are downsides to it. But the huge opportunities of having lessons that you can watch back when you're not quite sure about something. Let me go and watch that back again. Or if you really want to get into a subject, maybe searching online and getting a video from a first-year university course, because actually the university is providing some stuff online. Maybe there can be a much more interactive relationship with your learning from the home or in the holidays than you previously had. Because when I was at school, there were no computers in the classroom. None of that stuff existed. That was fine. It suited me because I was someone that liked learning in class, and I had good memories. So I could remember stuff. But there are a lot of people that I think would have hugely benefited from the ability to have much more online. And so our institutions, schools, universities need to be much more proactive. And when this whole pandemic passes, and I'm confident it will do in the not too distant future, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Actually think, what are the things we should keep and weave into our learning so that going forward, our students have a better experience?
So the second question is kind of a development on some of this and relates to technology in the kind of future world of work. So do you think that the increase in working from home during the pandemic will see a long-term shift to remote working? And if so, will there need to be any significant technology or infrastructure changes to support this?
I think it will. I think that if I think of, let's take Harpenden, the number of people who I know personally in Harpenden who have said to me, there is no way I'm commuting 5 days a week again. Some of them will be your parents. And depending on what they do, they may commute 3 or even 4 days a week, but they aren't going to do 5 days. And in fact, I was talking to the Chancellor, Rishi, about this over the weekend, and Rishi made the point that he said, well, Bim, if everybody does, or rather if there are places like Harpenden, for example, where people are doing 1 fewer day in the office, just one, that's a drop-off of 20%. That's hugely significant in terms of the place that those people used to buy their lunch, the dry cleaning they used to do, maybe that they used to get picked up in central London, the amount of money that goes on the train line and upgrading it because the number of people who use it. All of those knockoffs are huge. Those knockoff impacts are huge. So do I think we'll need infrastructural changes? Yes, but actually we're very lucky. Not all of the country, but actually in this area, and broadly Hertfordshire, Berkshire, Surrey, the home counties are broadly pretty well networked. Internet can always be better, it can always be faster, but actually it's got a lot better in recent years. I'm hopeful that actually we're in quite a good place, and it will help the local high street, the local village shops, because people will be spending, I think, more of their money in where they live, and I think that will be of benefit.
So you talked in your kind of answer to the questions and in your talk as well about seeing the pandemic not necessarily as something inherently bad, but as an opportunity as well. So what opportunities do you think there are now, specifically in education, for the Department of Education and for schools as well to evolve to use technology given the recent adaptations due to COVID?
Yeah, so Alastair, when you go into politics, what you'll learn is you should never say something like a pandemic is not inherently bad. Never say that. Now, in a pandemic, it's a terrible thing. I want to be very, very clear about that. But no, I'm kidding. In educational terms, I think there are two big challenges. The first is the divide between successful students and schools and less successful students and schools. That has grown hugely during the last year. And the reason why that has grown, quite simply, isn't just online provision and whether it's good or bad, but because in, frankly, a lot of poorer, more disadvantaged areas, a lot of the schools last year in particular didn't open for much longer. The provision they offered last year was much inferior to what I know that you guys got in Harpenden, all the Harpenden schools. And over the summer holidays in more disadvantaged areas, what research shows is that the kids fall further behind than in better off areas. And that's for a bunch of complex reasons. So I think that that's one reason. And the second is the divide that I mentioned in my speech, really between people that are benefiting from the digital transformation and people that aren't. And that is something that feeds through educationally as well. So I think they're the things we have to be aware of.
You talked a bit about in there about about kind of the gaps in kind of in education that resulted from kind of technology in the pandemic. So looking at technology from a more broader perspective, how do you think tech will widen or close the inequality gap in the UK?
I think that the trends in economics are towards widening inequality in economic, as I say, in economic terms. However, that isn't the same thing as there being fewer opportunities, because you can have an equal opportunity but end up with huge inequality. And of course, vice versa is also true. So I think that what we're going to see is the trends in economic terms are broadly, I think, going to go in that direction. Subject to governments doing certain things I think governments need to do, and governments can do a lot. I know I sort of said things are very global, but governments can do a lot around making sure you have a capable industrial strategy, and there are various, and the green energy revolution, which some people have already touched on, there are huge opportunities there. But I want to go on to the societal to make the point that if you have an unequal society in economic terms, in the past, people weren't aware of it very much. People didn't travel very much. They didn't have anything to look at. They didn't read newspapers. Even if they did, newspapers didn't have many photos in them. So you just sort of lived your life. Now, people are so hyper aware, not just what's going on in their own country, but what's happening globally within minutes. I just think that it becomes very difficult in political terms, and I don't mean that in a party political way, but just in broadly political terms, to have a cohesive society in that environment. And if you layer on top of it, what I perceive to be a lot of the, I don't know how to put, sort of the culture issues that get talked about all the time now, in both good and bad ways. If you layer on top those things, they appear to me to be another thing that people are then taking on in terms of looking internationally and globally. And I think that all of these things added up equal to the potential for society coming further apart, unless people embed themselves in their communities in the real world, as I was trying to say.
Fantastic. So our next question is kind of taking a bit more of a segue away from technology and onto another topic that's been a focus of the government's response to coronavirus, which is the arts. So do you think the arts industries will recover post-COVID? And if so, what place do you think they will have in society after the pandemic?
Arts will come back because there is an insatiable human need for creativity and enjoyment of music, theatre, etc. So I'm confident about that. I am worried. So where am I worried? I'm worried about the what sometimes happens is we always think, oh, well, something's gone away. And then when it comes back, all the people that did that are just there, and then they can just come on back. It would have been a year. And a lot of people working in the arts, not at the very top at the West End, Lloyd Webber, but people further down may well have been forced to take other work. And so I do think that some of the smaller theatres, more regional theatres, regional music groups may suffer more. But I'm hopeful that it will come back, broadly speaking, in similar ways to as it was before.
Fantastic. So thank you for answering those questions. Some more I'm sure you've seen have popped up in the Q&A section.
No, I haven't seen them.
There will be some others that we had. I'll ask some of the type in some of the others that were asked on the Google form. So our final speaker today is Elizabeth Bratton, who is in Year 13 at Sir John Law's School, where she studies French, German, and English literature. Elizabeth is ultimately striving to become a journalist with a particular focus on human rights. She runs her own news site with more than 40 writers from across the globe and aims to make current affairs more accessible to young people. She is passionate about equality of opportunity and advocates for a world where diversity of talent and skill are embraced. Her talk is called Why Now is the Time to Redefine Success.
Thank you very much. Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget once said, "Education for most people means trying to lead the child to resemble the typical adult of his society. But for me, and no one else, education means making creators. You have to make inventors, innovators, not conformists." I chose to begin my speech with this quotation for two reasons. Firstly, I can't think of a single period in time when it hasn't been relevant. Throughout history, members of society, particularly young people, have been encouraged, if not forced, to observe the status quo without really questioning why they're doing it. This has led to generations of students who feel obliged to fulfill their parents' wishes, meet their peers' expectations, and ultimately compromise their own dreams. Secondly, I believe we have the opportunity to break this cycle now. At a time when many of us have been struggling with feelings of constant dread and prolonged isolation, we have found ourselves increasingly reliant on artists, whether they be video game designers, musicians, poets, or authors. It is these people who pursue the career pathways that we often portray as low-skilled, financially disastrous, or perhaps even futile. Yet it's these very same people who have been keeping us entertained throughout the lockdown over the past year. The past year has proven that we have an innate need for artists, and the world would be a much better place if there were more of them. Ultimately, the number of students who will go on to become a professional sort of artist is relatively low, and many would speculate that this is a result of a competitive job market. And that's true to an extent, but I would argue that there's another factor at play. And that factor is a lack of information and advice for young creatives. Young artists often don't know how to turn their creativity into a career, or how to gain the recognition that they deserve for their eye for detail. Today, I hope to convince you that the pathway to success is a subjective one. I hope to convince you that we should constantly be questioning the expectations projected onto our young, often impressionable members of society, who with little experience of the real world, find their worth reduced to their employability. Younger students often light up when they are asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" The average kid might respond with something along the lines of an astronaut or an author, or nowadays, if they're feeling particularly ambitious, TikTok famous. However, for older students, this sort of question can evoke real feelings of dread. According to the Mental Health Foundation, 60% of UK students aged 18 to 24 have felt overwhelmed or unable to cope as a result of pressure to succeed. 57% have felt the same way as a result of fear of making mistakes. 18-year-olds may legally be considered adults, but that does not necessarily mean that they are equipped to deal with the burden of expectation that constantly looms over them. The struggle to identify one's niche at such a young age is an exhausting one, but it's also a struggle that many of us feel compelled to take on. Not only do we have to identify the subjects we find the most fun and enticing, but we must also, from a very early age, consider the financial implications of our choices, And then in addition to that, we have to consider the response that our decisions may garner from our peers and parents. It's difficult to pinpoint the exact moment that passions are reduced to potential salaries, but it happens without a doubt. Suddenly art is considered nothing more than an easy, woolly, or even lazy subject that students might enjoy, but won't actually be able to do anything with. Online magazine Design Week found that almost half of UK students aged 16 to 25 hoped to pursue a creative career. This figure was particularly high at 70% for 16 to 18-year-olds. However, the majority of these students said that they lack the support to follow through with their aspirations, and almost half admitted to feeling pressured to pursue a more traditional career pathway. It was particularly notable to me that the youngest students were among the most creatively ambitious, almost as if these hopes and dreams are dashed as students age and are more vehemently pushed down traditional career pathways. A study by creative magazine It's Nice That confirms my suspicions that creative students often feel limited by their parents' expectations. This survey found that 75% of those parenting under 18s would consider subjects such as English and maths to be more lucrative than arts and new technologies. The study also found that almost half of these parents would attempt to sway their child's decision regarding the subject they study at university. And given that the vast majority of these parents do seem to favour the more traditional subjects, although I'm not entirely sure what that means, it's very clear to me down which career pathway these students are likely to be pushed, whether or not that is in their best interests. I have no doubt that the parents I just mentioned want the best for their children and to watch them prosper. However, emotional well-being must also be taken into account. When such a vast proportion of students are deprived of the opportunity to pursue their passions, it's inevitable that they're going to feel dismissed, neglected, or perhaps even inferior to their more academic counterparts. Almost half of UK and sixth form students feel pressured to go to university, but 65% of graduates express regrets about doing so. That's according to global technology company IBM, whose study highlighted a lack of awareness about alternative career pathways, for example, degree apprenticeships, but also exposed a widespread misconception that there is only one clear route to success. It is not illogical to assume that overall satisfaction among students would dramatically increase if these alternative career pathways were more commonly promoted and more widely accepted as just different means to success, whether or not they include university. The study also proves that pushing or even shoving students down a particular career pathway doesn't necessarily lead to higher levels of prosperity. There is now talk of a renaissance in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, something I believe should certainly be encouraged. John T. Claypole, the Director for Arts at the BBC, explains that artists tend to flourish in extended periods of isolation. Specifically, he believes that new books, films, plays, poems, paintings, and sculptures will emerge on the other side of this crisis. Bookstore Waterstones has also seen an unprecedented rise in demand for books, while tens of millions of people have flocked online to watch virtual theatre productions. In fact, the National Theatre reports that its recent viewing figures equate to all 3 of its venues being filled for a total of 11 years. It's clear to me that we're becoming increasingly reliant on artists. And this is because art helps us to relax. It helps us to forget the bleak news headlines we see on a daily basis. And ultimately, it serves as a form of escapism. So suddenly those artists, who so many of us are too quick to bash, are the very same people who have become an integral part of our lives in lockdown. You may be surprised to learn that as of the first lockdown, 28% of more than 2,000 UK-based respondents had considered setting up their own creative business. That's according to desktop factory specialist Makey. It seems to me that those who have previously been forced to push their love for the arts to the side have finally been given the space to realise that both enjoying and profiting from art is a valid career pathway. 48% of those potential entrepreneurs were members of Generation Z, meaning they're still in the very early stages of their lives. And what that means is, if we encourage and nurture that talent now, they will likely feel adequately supported to pursue their desired career pathway later on in life, ultimately leading to higher levels of happiness. You should be pleased to learn that opportunities for budding creatives certainly are increasing. In 2018, the Creative Industries Council found that there were 2.04 million creative jobs in the UK. They also found that creative jobs were being created quicker than in any other sector and predicted that another 1 million would be made by 2030. The number of vacancies is only going to increase with time, and the only way to fill these gaps is to encourage artists to pursue a career pathway that allows them to demonstrate that flair and that passion that they have. And before we portray the arts as a fruitless and an unprofitable industry, it's important to remember that they play an essential part in the UK economy. According to the government's official website, in 2018, the creative industries contributed a total of £111.7 billion to the economy. That equates to approximately £306 million on a daily basis, a figure that was up 7.4% from the previous year, while the rest of the economy saw an increase of about 1.4%. This is surely demonstrative of the fact that arts do not solely provide solace in challenging times such as these, but are also essential in upholding national financial stability. So when the World Economic Forum predicted that creativity would be the third most important skill for employees by 2020, I don't think they expected a pandemic and a national lockdown to be the factors which contributed to an increased appreciation for the arts. But here we are. As if looking into a crystal ball in 2016, they said, with the avalanche of new products, new technologies, and new ways of working, workers are going to have to become more creative in order to benefit from these changes. And they were right, but perhaps just not in the way that any of us were expecting or hoping for. I therefore hope that those of us who seek comfort in art will begin to reassess our values and reconsider the career pathways that we deem to be the most worthy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for your talk. I completely agree. The arts are an incredibly important part of British society and the British economy as well. So that brings us to the end of today's events. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and I hope you enjoyed our event today. Thank you very much again to those of you who have interacted with and asked questions to our speakers, and I hope everyone has something that they've learned and can take away from today as well. Finally, I want to say another massive thank you to our 6 fantastic speakers who've worked so hard to create the presentations that you've just seen. I would also like to say thank you to all the teachers who have been a massive help with publicising the event around their respective schools. It's down to your efforts that you've had so many people from such a wide range of schools attending today. I'd also like to thank my dad, who has been a huge help in organising this event and giving advice on some of its most important aspects. And finally, I would like to say a big thank you to Mrs. Barter from Roundwood Park, who has been the co-organiser for this event and whose help and support I really appreciate. So that brings this event to a close. As a final point of order, an attendee form will be sent around shortly for you to feedback to TED about how you found today's event. Today's webinar was also recorded, and each separate talk will be posted on YouTube, and I will distribute the URLs to everyone who's here and couldn't make it when they're ready. So thank you very much for coming, and I hope you will enjoy your weekend.